Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's May 13th, 2020. I'm over in the work area and I thought I'd give you a brief update on my health and then go into talking about the blueberry transplants. So overall, I'm very pleased with the progress that I've been making since the last update on my health. Steadily improving, nowhere near where I'd like to be. I get pretty exhausted at the end of every day, and I need to really pay close attention to maintaining hydration. Despite it being so cold, we have our weather here has been below freezing at nighttime, snow every couple of days as well. So we're below our normal temperatures, which we usually have pretty cool temperatures this part of the country. But you know, my health has been improving. The coughing has been reduced. I'm probably cut my coughing about another 50%. So doing the coughing in the morning and coughing whenever I breathe anything that irritates my my airway, and bringing up some material, but not a lot. Central nervous system working well, gastrointestinal system working well. Energy and my diet has been improved. I'm starting to get some sense of smell again and some taste. And not normal yet, but it's definitely improving. Energy level has been improving, but I get really pooped out because there's lots of things that I want to get going on around here, and that's a tad frustrating as well. Fortunately, with Thea's work and having you know, more time at home as a result of of her career, she's been able to help me do some of these projects. So the project that I'm going to share with you today is the last few days have been working in the western garden plot. Now the western garden plot is the westernmost garden plot that we have on the property. It has a chain link kennel style fencing that we put up around it. It's composed of compost and lots of wood chips that we've been breaking down over years for our paths and all. And this last year we went ahead and did all of our hardwood cuttings, and you know, so we had gooseberries, red currants, black currants, pink currants, grapevines, elderberry plants, I said grapevines, pussy willows. We had sage in another area of the area, oregano, and a bunch of potted plants as well. And so, and then that was an area that had not used weed mats last year, and the hardwood cuttings had really put massive roots on them, so it was a big challenge. And we also had two permanent raised beds where we had our new seedling blueberry bushes that I purchased on eBay from a woman in Kentucky, I believe. And it was either Kansas or Kentucky, I can't really recall now. So we bought 200, 4 different varieties, and one of the varieties, one of the grapevine varieties came and it was completely leafed out, and I was really concerned about those, how well they would do. But we got 50 of each of 4 different varieties, so 200 plants. Now, small grapevine plants. We ended up with 78 that are alive. And so, what actually went wrong with this? Well, I think the blueberry plants that were already leafed out and then taking a few days in shipping, I got them into the ground the very next morning after getting them in, after receiving them. But they're the ones that didn't do the best. The other varieties, there were significant losses because out of 200 plants we ended up with 78. And the things that I would say that I would attribute the poor survival rate would be one, weed competition. I didn't spend the time weeding that I should have weeded. Two, for each permanent raised bed, and the beds are about approximately 30 inches wide, I ended up putting 2 rows of the blueberry seedlings, so they were closer to the margins of the bed, and as a result that made weeding more challenging. And I ended up putting, first it was red onions bulbs in the middle between the blueberry plants, which I knew wouldn't do lots of shading out, but they did do a fair amount of shading out, and they might have competed for some of the nutrients. Then after I harvested the red onions, I put beets in there, and they did a really good job of shading out the blueberry plants. So those were a few variables that I think were detrimental to the success of those blueberry seedlings. The next problem that I would say is with our heavy snows that we get during the wintertime, I didn't put protective hoops over them, so a lot of them got flattened out and broken down over the winter months as well. So that's the bad news. I accept complete responsibility for the failures that we did have. But what we decided to do was I used the rototiller to go ahead and help to break up a lot of the weeds and the root structure of so many of these hardwood cuttings and all, because I couldn't get all the roots out when I was doing all the transplants. The roots were so massive in so many of these plants. And I wanted to do this quickly, so I used the rototiller. And if you've been watching this channel for a while, I'm not a big fan of using rototiller when we're doing permanent raised beds. It does a lot of destruction of the soil structure, and for all the variety of reasons that I've talked about in the past. But I decided to use a rototiller to rototill the beds and the areas where the sage and the oregano were, to try and knock down the weeds, and every time that the weeds would start to come back and rototill. So I've been doing this for a couple of weeks now, and so yesterday Thea went out, dug up all of the root mass of the blueberry plants that were salvageable, and placed them in some of our large seed flats, brought them in here, kept them in the work area here, and I continued to go ahead and work on the beds. So all of the seedlings that were now 1-year-old blueberry plants were brought inside in here, and then I went to work on the beds. Now the 2 beds that we originally started the blueberry seedling plants in, I had amended with quite a bit of peat moss because the soil pH is too high after me doing the compost, creating the compost. And even with the wood chips breaking down as well, the pH is about 6.5, and we really want to get our pH down to 5.5, somewhere in that range. And so the 2 beds were amended with peat moss last season, but I decided to use up several bags of peat moss that I had out back. So first thing I did, I went through the beds, rototilled them, destroyed the root structure and some of the weeds that were there, got rid of whatever weeds that I could easily get rid of after running the rototiller down the beds. Then I brought in and I used the mini excavator to pick up these moisture-laden peat moss bags that I had. So they're those large cubes that you see when you go to the grain and feed store, wherever or your nursery. So we had all these bags, probably over a dozen bags of peat moss, and I decided to re-amend the first and second rows where the blueberry plants were in the past, and the row alongside of it. Because I decided instead of having 2 rows of blueberry plants in each permanent raised bed, I'm going to put down 1 row down the center, put them 2 feet apart with 78 plants. That takes up 3 beds basically. I had to extend the ends of the beds a little bit. So I took the mini excavator, picked up the the bags of the peat moss, put them in the wheelbarrowed them up here into the garden, opened up the bags, and then went ahead and took shovels full and worked my way right down and used over a dozen bags, whatever I had left, to amend the beds. Then I went ahead, rototilled the areas again. Then I got the swivel hiller out. It's similar to a rototiller. What it does is, as you walk down a path, a future path, it'll take the material that's in the path, the old broken down wood chips, and throw it up onto the surface of the bed. So I did that in between each one of the rows that where the beds are. Now our beds are very deep, and I've explained in the past why we have such deep beds, for helping with snow and moisture control and the tarps during the winter months. And it's easier access. We have pretty wide paths. It's much easier for us to work in the paths and the beds actually being higher, especially when we're working with crops that are relatively short in stature. So I went ahead, after hilling the material from the paths onto the beds, I went ahead and ran the tiller through it again. Now we've mixed in adequately all of the material from the peat moss into the beds. And the next step then was to go ahead and shovel out the paths so they're nice and neat so we don't twist an ankle. One area I'll show you where the honeyberries were. I added some of the wood chips that were the most fresh wood chips still in that western garden plot. And I used that as a mulch on top of the soil where the honeyberries are. And then Thea went out. I marked the central line. Thea went out with a stick, a 2-foot stick, and went ahead and took those blueberry plants today and started replanting those into the beds. Now we're going to get rain tonight or tomorrow, so that'll be good for watering them. The soil still has a pretty high moisture content. Certainly the peat moss was certainly saturated, which made it weigh so much. So what I thought I'd do now is throw on the helmet cam and just go on out and look at the area to show you what we've got, and so you can see where we're starting off at the beginning of each season with each garden plot, and how we're going to how we plan to address weed issues or other problems as we go, and try to maximize the use of the space that we have without overworking ourselves and making it more challenging as well. So I'm going to throw the GoPro helmet cam on now, and we'll take a walk out to the western garden plot. All right, heading over to the western garden plot is the rototiller on the back of the BCS tractor. This is an Italian-made 2-wheel walk-behind tractor where the handlebars actually go from end to end on it. So in other words, you can have front-mounted equipment coming off the PTO here and have the handlebars at the other side. But the two implements that I used in the last couple days are the rototiller and the swivel mounted hiller. So let's go over here into the western garden plot. So this is a hoop that we've had here for several years now. In the past we've grown Cherokee Trail-a-Tears on one side and the Scarlet Red Runner beans on the other side. We decided this year we're just going to go with the Scarlet Red Runner beans for the same reasons I've talked about in the past. Hopefully the wind isn't too bad here, but we're finally getting some sunshine and the warmth is up a bit as well. So here are the beds, and so this is the first permanent raised bed with some of the blueberries here. These are the only survivors between this stake and this stake here of the leafed out blueberry plants that first came. So we've got 3 different permanent raised beds with blueberry plants going down the center. I dug out the paths a little bit deeper here, and as I mentioned, this is where the honeyberries are, up against the kennel panels here. And I will be putting irrigation in each one of these beds once I get them all planted out and set here. But that was fresh compost from last year, put it in along here. So we added this bed. It used to be potted plants sitting up against this edge. And I hilled up some of the extra wood chips here. So as I'm propagating these honeyberry plants, I'll use the wood chips to help mulch over some of the areas as well. Having these sunken lower paths really works out pretty darn well. It gives us plenty of room to move around and all. You know, you can see the cats were in here helping us earlier today. Here's one of the blueberry plants here. I've got to go and put the regular labels on. This is a wax tool. Hopefully this is going to work on these systems. And so hopefully these blueberry plants will end up turning out pretty darn well. Let's see. And these are all the honeyberries. You can see I've bent some of the limbs down different places all along here. So I already talked about this in a previous video, the honeyberries. But here we are. Here's the second and third row of the blueberry transplants. So some of them are still really rough, but hopefully with weed mats, so we'll put a weed mat going right up the edge, you'll go right up to the blueberry plants. So one edge of probably a 4-foot wide blueberry weed mat, or a 3-foot one, will come down and fit into the path. Same thing over here, like we've done in the central garden. Really almost completely eliminates all work in the beds. And by having these wider paths, I can actually turn my size 13 boots around in these areas, and we can get down in here and work by being right straight down in here. I don't know how well this is showing up, but it's pretty easy to work with low, so some of these got crunched over, as you can see. But hopefully these will take off this year. I will be fertilizing all of these blueberry plants as well. I don't think, I may be putting some nitrogen fixing flowers along the building, some lupines along in there. I'm not sure yet, so I can gather more seeds from those in the future. These two beds, Thea and I talked about a bit today. I still have to work on the paths for each of these beds and finish those up. But we'll probably be putting a couple of the brassicas, since they can go out here pretty early, next week. Then I can get the drip irrigation set for each one of these beds as well. Some of the material I took out from some of the paths, I went ahead and mounded up the soil where the scarlet red runner beans will be, seeds will be planted. I'm leaving the dandelions for right now. Oh, there's one of the honeybees coming in and getting a little bit of nectar and pollen. So this is the area that really got super weedy last year. And so I'll probably rototill this area again. I've got to get these pots out of here, but this will be an area where we build up in the future. But I was thinking about putting some squash plants in here, some of our big Sweet Georgia squash, and some of our Blue Hubbard squash, maybe some butternut squash in here, and just let them do some ground cover, probably using weed mats as well to help control the weeds in the system. So this is what things look like right now out here in the garden beds. And so we got 3 rows of blueberry plants here, and then we'll decide what we're going to actually have in these beds here. I've got to do a little bit more of a work on the paths, and the hiller does a really good job of throwing that soil up onto the beds, and so that worked out. So I'm going to head back in and we'll close up this video. Okay, so I hope that all makes sense. Looking at the layout of the western garden plot, the also known as the perennial garden plot. Now this year it's going to be a combination of some annuals, as well as the honeyberries and the blueberry plants in there as well. A lot of the blueberry plants look pretty darn rough, as you could see from the video footage and all. But you know, I think that there's a chance that they can really progress from here. And my plans are to use the 1/2-inch electrical conduit that I made hoops out of, and try and protect them from the heavy snows this coming winter, and see how things do. So I don't expect 100% success from the 78 plants that we have remaining, but we're going to do our best and see what we can get out of it. I've got a lot of other things to do, and I'm all tuckered out, so I think what I may do is just pick up for the evening, and it's early. It's like 3:45. Yeah. So I tucker out real easy this day and age, and I've been pushing myself pretty hard doing a lot of the shoveling. What I will do is I'll add some time-lapse GoPro footage that I set the camera up over the last couple of days just to see some of the process that we go through. Getting the beds transitioned, getting the peat moss amended to the soil, and going through using the hiller, using the BCS tractor to do the rototilling as well. And again, I'm not a big fan of using a rototiller in the gardens, but in this circumstances, I thought it was best to use that piece of equipment to save on labor, certainly. So what will follow is some GoPro time-lapse video. If you choose to watch that, that would be fine. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. If you think the video is of value, please give us a thumbs up. And what I'll try to do is with each one of the garden plots as I prep them this season and I make the changes, when I put the drip tapes down for in here, I'll probably make a video about that as well, and putting the weed mats down. Hopefully I'll get to doing that as well. So, by all means, folks, have a super fantastic day. Stay safe. Try not to get this infection out there. It's really a bear of an infection. And take care, folks. Bye-bye now.